All right. Hey there, this is Bram Kanstan, and you're listening to Bitcoin for Millennials. In this episode, I'm joined by Joe Burnett. He's a researcher at Unchained, a leading Bitcoin financial services company. Joe's renowned for his insights into Bitcoin's superior monetary properties and its role as a immutable, scarce asset that can preserve wealth over the long term. He's emerged as one of the most influential voices explaining why Bitcoin represents a paradigm shift in money and savings, so I'm super excited to talk with him today. Welcome, Joe.
Awesome. Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I just told you, I love the backdrop. That's something I'm gonna work on. Love the HODL waves. So and love seeing you in person, man. As I said off mic, I really love the content that you're creating. I think really nice breakdowns. So for anyone who's listening that doesn't follow you yet, I think they should.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I also wanted to dive into your latest report, which is called Your Wealth is Melting, Why Bitcoin is the Deep Freeze Your Portfolio Desperately Needs. But first, I wanted to ask you about your Bitcoin journey. How did that go?
Yeah, definitely. I love hearing these stories, so it's always fun to talk about your own as well. I remembered initially discovering Bitcoin back when I was in college. It was 2017. And I had grown up interested in computers. I'd built apps and stuff. And then I'd also been interested in finance, whether that was basic investing in Coca-Cola and IBM. And I remember, learning the concept of investing and kind of value investing and investing in blue chip US public equities, and knowing that, okay, you save by buying Coca-Cola, it goes up, 2% a year, and you earn a 3% dividend every year. And that's kind of how you save for the future. And then I remember being in college in 2017, price of Bitcoin was going from 1,000 to 3,000 to 6,000 to 18,000. And during that time, I was like, what is this digital money currency that is quadrupling in value super fast?
No dividends.
So I was like, yeah, exactly. No dividends. So yeah, I initially completely was very skeptical of Bitcoin, which I think many people are, and for good reasons. And yeah, so the price just kept going up. Eventually I was like, you know what, I'll buy a little just to try to learn what this new technology is and, get some skin in the game. And then all throughout 2018, the bear market, I just dove deep into Bitcoin, trying to figure out what it is. Eventually, I became pretty much a Bitcoin maximalist. And I was like, okay, all of these other coins don't really make sense. Bitcoin is the world's best money. And then I started to really try to figure out why I could be wrong. And the price kept going down, and I couldn't find a good reason as to why I was wrong. So I ironically got increasingly bullish as the price kept going down in 2018. And then 2019, 2018, I was like, this makes perfect sense. It's eventually going to go to, a lot higher than where it is today, whether that was 6,000, 3,000 back then. And yeah, and bull market came eventually, after 2020 basically. And it's been a pretty wild journey.
Nice. What made it click for you then? You said you were studying, and of course there's lots of dimensions to Bitcoin, and when you came from value investing and the dividends, etc., what was it that made it click for you?
Yeah. So like you said, the no cash flow and the no dividends part really held me back for a significant amount of time, because I was like, this thing is just worthless. It's a digital rock that's just worth what someone else will pay for it. And then the light bulb moment for me was wait, that's just what money is, right? Everyone converges on one best monetary tool with certain monetary properties. And Bitcoin just now, after the discovery of Bitcoin, happens to have the best properties for being a good money. It's immutably perfectly scarce. It's portable. It's durable. It's divisible. It's fungible. And once I figured out that, I was like, wait a second, if this is just money and this is the best money, and no one has quite grasped what it is quite yet, which because we've never seen the monetization of a new form of money, then this is probably right. And then, like I said, I tried to figure out and listen to the people that were against Bitcoin, or were quote unquote bearish on Bitcoin. And their arguments to me at the time just seemed like they hadn't really done their research. Like they had looked into Bitcoin for, a couple hours at most and came to the conclusion that it was, a pet rock that didn't make any sense. So once I found out that like, okay, this is actually probably the best money, the smartest people in the world really don't even think about what money is. They haven't thought about it for years if they've ever really thought about it. And so it makes sense that there might be a chance that Bitcoin is actually the best money, and a lot of people are overlooking it.
Hey there, I want to ask you for a quick favor. I noticed something interesting. 75% of my viewers aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing helps me grow this channel, ensuring more great content each week. So if you're enjoying our conversations on Bitcoin for Millennials, please consider hitting the subscribe button on YouTube or the follow button on your favorite podcasting app. I'm super grateful for everyone who already joined and shared their thoughts. Your feedback really keeps me going, and I want to ask you to continue doing that. I try to respond to all the comments and also the emails that I get and DMs on Twitter, etc. So don't stop doing that. I'll keep going. Now let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, it's funny that once you do dive into it and you understand, the essential elements, if you then again talk with people and ask their opinion, you can quickly dissect if what they say is actually based on the work they put in, right? Like I don't know how you see that now, but I think a lot of people that go against Bitcoin, Saylor says there are no informed critiques, but it really seems like that, and of course it sounds, how do you say, kind of like looking down when you say that, right? Like there are no informed critiques, but I'm still looking for it. Even the zero hedge debate, with Schiff and Rubini, I just hear emotional stuttering, basically, right? Like I'd love to hear rational arguments against my own rational arguments, but they're not really there. But I think, and you touched upon one thing, I think like you were looking at it from an investment perspective, right? While it's a savings vehicle, I think you would agree. And a lot of people also look at it as like a technological innovation, while and therefore they also look at crypto, right? Some faster transactions, etc. But as you said, it's a new asset and it's digital scarcity that you can only invent once, right? So both of these kind of like angles as to how people look at it, it's just not the correct angle, but it takes time studying, right, to figure that out. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And I think another thing that was really telling to me over the years was like seeing the cycles, like looking at Bitcoin on a log chart versus like a linear chart and seeing like, wait, this thing keeps making like higher highs, higher lows. It's not dying. Like people look at the linear chart and see, oh, it's a bubble. Oh, it's a bubble. Oh, it's a bubble. And then they like can't zoom out and look at, oh, wait, it's, this thing is actually growing, rapidly, really rapidly, and in spirit and in different periods of adoption, bursts of adoption. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, what I to add to that, I heard Jack Mahler say we've been in a 15-year bull market. I thought I like that that point, because we are discovering what this is, right? And actually, and he said the same thing, like there's higher highs, higher lows, right? It's not that we go massively under the lows, basically. It's literally monetization. But again, as you said, also like we haven't lived through something like that. So I think that's also why it's hard for people to kind of zoom out even more, like outside also the area of expertise, right? To actually figure out what is going on here.
Yeah, totally.
And so how do you experience talking to your peers? You're obviously a bit younger. I think you're part of Gen Z, right? How do they think about money? Are they researching money? Like what is your experience?
Yeah, it's such a funny, interesting question talking about Bitcoin to my friends. I feel like generally speaking, most of my close friends like know I'm in Bitcoin, and I try not to talk about it 24/7, 365, just because if they want to talk about it, they'll ask me a question. And if they don't want to talk about it, I'm just going to talk about something else with them.
Yeah.
How they think of money in Bitcoin, I think it depends. Like I have friends that I went to college with, studied finance, like worked on Wall Street or still work on Wall Street. Most of them or pretty much all of them, own a little bit of Bitcoin. They're not like full-fledged Bitcoin maxis and have, a massive portion of their personal wealth in Bitcoin, but like some of them have like set up hardware wallets, like they have a seed phrase, like they know how to, buy and store Bitcoin in self-custody, which is pretty cool. But they're still like at the end of the day a little bit skeptical and still fall to the, they think they should have the, beautiful diversified portfolio that a lot of people in traditional finance think is rational. So yeah, a lot of people I think like own a little bit of Bitcoin. A lot of my friends that I talk to, I think some also kind of are susceptible to like the degeneracy of like gambling. They see that housing prices are so expensive relative to, their income, like someone that graduated college, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And they're like, wow, like me working a normal job, I'll never be able to afford a house. So I'm going to speculate on Dogecoin and just average into my 401k and then rent forever. And hopefully one day I'll be able to buy like a tiny little house and maybe have a family if I could potentially afford that. So I think there's a lot of that as well, where it's like people see the price of Bitcoin is very high and they're like, there's no point in saving for the future because I don't make enough money to really save much. So they're like, I'm just going to gamble and speculate, which is unfortunate, but I've seen that, with a few people. And yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag, I would say. Some are embracing Bitcoin at least a little bit, and then some are falling into like the degeneracy of speculation.
Yeah. I asked a similar question to Ella Huff, but like, as I'm a mid millennial, I think, but when I look at at Gen Z, I kind of see like this barbell. There's not a lot in the middle, but it's like it's either a nihilistic worldview, gambling, there's no future, environment is going down, etc. And there's like very optimistic, active people that take use the power of the internet to educate themselves, just be like, I'm just going to do this myself, I can do this myself, right? Who are also actively sharing their knowledge, right? I think you and Ella are great examples of that. Do you think that reflects also your generation, like what you just mentioned? If kind of saddens me if I think like if you're like young, your early 20s, and you think about there's no future for me.
Yeah, it does sadden me that some people do fall for like the speculation and degeneracy, and some people have a pretty negative outlook on their, personal future, just with the way like, housing prices are so expensive and et cetera, et cetera. I think personally, like I don't necessarily feel that way because I think Bitcoin is kind of like an individual choice rather than a collective choice, to where like you can adopt Bitcoin today and you as an individual can adopt a Bitcoin standard and begin using Bitcoin as your unit of account and your opportunity cost, and recognizing that if you personally hold Bitcoin, then you'll probably end up doing pretty well. And I think it's important that people recognize that they don't have to convince the world necessarily to buy Bitcoin, or they just have to start buying Bitcoin themselves. And that's how they can slowly start changing the world. But yeah, I think like overall, like the TikTok brain or goldfish brain of, everyone today, especially Gen Z, is kind of a problem as well. I feel like a lot of people aren't capable of focusing on anything really for a long period of time, which is kind of concerning. But I'm definitely generally an optimistic person, like when it comes to the future of humanity. And I think, if there are hard times, we'll figure it out and we'll figure out how to get through it. And on the other side, we'll be better. Like I think technology is getting exponentially better and better. I think the world is getting exponentially more and more productive and more wealthy. And I think over time, over the long run, that's going to continue to be the case.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Bitcoin also helps with that, right? Yeah. To kind of substantiate that positive outlook. Like you have a tool to also get there in the future and to create the time to build those things. So your report was called "Your Wealth is Melting." What is the core premise of it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think about Bitcoin, especially people outside of Bitcoin, they think about Bitcoin as this lottery ticket that may be worth millions of dollars one day, or it's going to zero. Like they see it as this crazy speculative bet that may pay off, but probably it's not worth taking the risk. Or if they take the risk, they put a small amount of their wealth into Bitcoin, and they don't even really think about it as their wealth. They think about it as a lottery ticket, it's a gamble. I think they're true about the idea of Bitcoin being worth millions of dollars one day. I think they like vastly, overestimate the long-term downside risk in holding spot Bitcoin for sure. And I don't think this lottery ticket type view of Bitcoin is like the best way to analyze and think about Bitcoin from your personal perspective. And the way I think is that you should think about Bitcoin is that it's just money. Like I said, it's the best form of money. It's immutably scarce, it's portable, it's durable, divisible, fungible. It has all these unique properties. And with money, what do you do with it? Well, you save it and you trade it. That's pretty much all you do. And you use it as a unit of account. So you use money to measure if you're making profits, if your investments are going up or they're going down, or if you should be doing something else with your money, or if you should actually just be holding the money. And so the whole idea behind the report, Your Wealth is Melting, is to actually be using Bitcoin as money. So it's measuring various different traditional asset classes that people use today to store their wealth, visualizing that, hey, these asset classes are actually crashing in Bitcoin terms. One, due to the active monetization of Bitcoin going from zero to $1 trillion asset today. But two, just because I think Bitcoin is actually the best way to save for the future if you have a very long time horizon, because all of these other traditional asset classes that we have today, you can create more of the asset, whether that's like gold or real estate, or you can devalue the asset, whether that's like Nvidia stock or Apple or bonds or dollars as well. So it's really pitching Bitcoin as like the best money, and then comparing Bitcoin to how people traditionally save for the future today.
Yeah, and you touched upon the properties of money, right? Saving, exchanging, and using it as a unit of account. People who are learning about Bitcoin could say like, okay, well, I can measure my wealth in dollars. I can buy a bread with dollars. I can save in it. I can earn more numbers in my checking or my balance. Would you say that savings part is probably where the main argument lies as to why Bitcoin is, why the monetary properties of Bitcoin are superior, right? Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think saving Bitcoin today is very clearly like the core value proposition of Bitcoin. It's money that literally cannot be debased. People, look at dollars and they see, they know dollars are designed to debase. Like you ask any wealthy person today how they think about wealth, they say, oh, well, you should buy real estate, you should buy the S&P 500. You should even consider borrowing money and buying real estate and buying the S&P 500. Like that's how you store your wealth. Like wealthy people actually have negative dollars because they know the dollar is not good savings technology and it's literally designed to be debased. So yeah, I think Bitcoin is the best money because it's simply unprintable money. Whereas all of these other forms of monies are printable or mineable to infinity. And I think that's a complete game changer. And I think over time, more people will simply recognize that fact that more people will want to hold unprintable money over printable money.
Just when you were talking, I was thinking about now that you said, rich people actually don't have a lot of dollars, right? They have a lot of assets. Like I know people buy assets, right, to store wealth. Like I know this concept, but now that you said it, it's funny. I visualized like, let's say you have a stack of dollars and you know that thing is programmatically melting away, right? The value of that. So it's basically the same as to why we buy Bitcoin, right? We transform the dollars into Bitcoin. But it's also what they're doing with real estate. It's funny. I just realized that they're just turning it into bricks and a roof and some land, right? Just because the other thing that should be their savings vehicle is just not suited for savings, right? But I think that's a nice explainer eventually. Like, okay, people are saving in real estate. That is why real estate goes up. It's not that the people buying real estate are buying it for the purpose of real estate, which is living in it.
Yep, 100%.
That's a good one. So I read in your report. I love the, in general, I think the explanation of money. How did money start, right? With bartering, just in general, like also in fiat standard, Bitcoin standard, etc. But you touch upon why Bitcoin solves what is called the coincidence of wants problem, right? Like I have a bread and you have a cow, but you don't want bread when I want a cow, or the other way around, or we want to trade something different that is not bread or cows, right? That's what money eventually solved, because it became an abstract, right, for value that we could exchange. But you argue that Bitcoin solves it better than traditional fiat money, and I wanted to ask you why.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it comes back to Bitcoin's superior monetary properties. And I think one thing when it comes to the problem of the double coincidence of wants is a lot of people don't necessarily or intuitively know that this whole problem is solved by us converging on one best money. And so if you're out there holding the second best money or the third best money, like Michael Saylor says, there is no second best. He's very accurate when it comes to money, right? If you're holding the second best money and everyone and a bunch of other people happen to be holding the second best money as well, and money is only useful for savings and trade, like there's no other, it's not like oxygen or food where like you can use it, then you want to make sure that you quote unquote cash out of the second best money or the third best money before other people still holding the second best money or still even buying, the second best money, realize that, wait, they should cash out and buy the first best money as well. And it kind of goes back to what you talked about, the double coincidence of wants, is we're all trying to converge on one best tool for savings and trade. And so it's like, if you pick the worst one or the second best one, then other people are going to sell the second best one and go back and buy the first one, because we all want to use one common tool for savings and trade. And so, yeah, I think that Bitcoin is the best tool because it has the best monetary properties. And you can look at the monetary properties of Bitcoin, compare it to dollars, gold, ray stones, salt, glass beads, T-bills, whatever you want to compare it to. And you can recognize that Bitcoin literally is objectively the best money if you're looking at those characteristics. And it's kind of hard to debate that.
I think this is a really good point. If you say like there is a second best money, well, maybe you can only realize that after you answer the question or understand the answer to the question, what is money, or at least have some picture, because there's lots of different answers, right? But the fact that there are people that are already selling the second best money for a better money, that should be the main signal.
Yep.
The fact that it's happening, that people are moving, right?
100%.
And so when I still find it ridiculous, right? Like a few weeks ago, we went from 74 to 58, and the people are like, "Oh, it's all over," etc. But it's a magic internet coin worth $58,000, right? And we're at 66 again today. Just, you cannot deny the fact that there are some people who think more of this than a get rich quick thing, or however a nihilistic mind would view or characterize Bitcoin. And so I think that's that would be a great argument, right? If you for explaining Bitcoin, just say like people buying Bitcoin or selling the second best money, your money, the money that you have in your wallet, right? They're selling it for the better money, and the price is not the price of an asset, it's an exchange rate. So you need 66,000 units of the money you have in your wallet for one of these, right? I love that. I'm also, through the podcast, like I'm looking for simpler ways to make points, because obviously this is very complex. And if you just start talking about, this is what money is and people are printing it, and your time, energy, space, time, like you can lose people pretty quickly, I think. But there's these little examples, like I also used the one about, would you agree that progressing technology lowers prices of things, right? Like when I was in high school, I bought this crazy graphic, like scientific calculator, right, for 200 euros or dollars. Now it's in my phone for free.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you? And then people say yes. And then I say, okay, well, and then I start talking about, do you think the bread is different than the bread in the 1950s? No, not really. I said, but the bread in the 1950s was a quarter and you pay 4 euros now. Like, does that make sense to you? Right? Shouldn't we be able to make better bread? Or shouldn't you have, like, I don't know, free bread, or like a pill you put in water and then a bread pops out or something like that, right? And so I try to make like these kinds of more simpler arguments to just get people thinking. But I love what you're saying, right? Like, and then translating that into, for example, it's not a price, it's an exchange rate, right? And then, you could get people to, it's a competing currency, and it's not a currency in one other country. No, it's a worldwide currency that anyone could use, and even you, right? So, I love figuring out like these little pointers that are like easily shareable. There's another thing you talk about, which you call the innovation trap. Can you share a bit about that and how it affects the ability of traditional assets, right? So let's say real estate, for example, to preserve wealth over time. So people try to save in it, right? That's why the price is going up. But why aren't they actually 100%. Good assets?
100%. So yeah, the general idea is that anything that you're saving in today outside of Bitcoin can be debased by additional production of the asset or devalued by competition coming in, creating better technology. So NVIDIA is a kind of a good example of like the innovation trap in particular, where it's like a lot of people are investing in, quote unquote, the Magnificent Seven or Magnificent Eight, whatever the number is, of big tech in the United States. And they think that they're investing in this cutting edge innovation, and that's the perfect way to grow wealth forever. And you should always be holding, Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, or Meta now, and whoever else, and NVIDIA. And that's how you should save permanently for the future. But the idea is like there's more innovation coming down the line, and it's not necessarily coming from, those companies per se. It could be coming from entrepreneurs tinkering and building new things, or other big and small companies as well. So like right now, NVIDIA, for example, it's like they're manufacturing GPUs at say $500 and then selling those GPUs for $30,000. So right now their margins are, massive, and they're highly innovative. Like they're building cutting edge computer chips. Yet, if markets are efficient and, Adam Smith's invisible hand of other people going out there acting in their own self-interest to build a better, faster, cheaper GPU, if that's the case, which is like the case if you buy into the idea of free markets and capitalism, then there's going to be other competitors and other entrepreneurs that come in, innovate, and take wealth away or take market share away from NVIDIA and Apple and Google and all of these other companies. And so it's like by investing in innovation, you're not necessarily doing what you're trying to do. You're not saving wealth in the best way possible, because you're effectively, pouring a bunch of wealth into NVIDIA, which creates like a bounty. Say if there's $2 trillion worth of wealth in NVIDIA, it creates a bounty for entrepreneurs and tinkerers and other businesses to try to attack NVIDIA, build a better GPU, and take some of their market share. So that's the key idea around the innovation trap, is just if you're investing in innovation and there's a lot of wealth in innovative companies, then people are going to be attacking those innovative companies and trying to take some of their future cash flows.
Yeah. I absolutely love that, right? Like basically you're validating the technology that they're spearheading, thus opening up a new market, right? I feel it's a bit similar as to, if we start digging for more gold and we fund gold expeditions and we find more gold, it kind of devalues what was already there because other people can get to it as well, right? I think it's a similar thing there. But also, as you said, like, why are all these prices going up? It's the same as with real estate, right? There are already people knowingly and unknowingly, right? Like people who just invest in S&P 500 ETF that is held up by these 7 or 8 companies, right? I think it's 7.
Yeah.
People are actually already searching for that better way to store their wealth, right? I think real estate, that starts from a certain bracket, of course, for dollars that you already have, but stock market is probably, usable by anyone, whatever your level of wealth is that you start with.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think this is a simple way of thinking about it, but also to explain it. Like, why are you in the stock market? Yeah, okay, I want to make a return. Yeah, but why do you want to make a return? Yeah, because I want more money. Well, why do you need more money? Well, I don't know. Other people are doing it. Why do you think other people are doing it, right? So I think like that's how you can kind of like peel the layers of the onion back a little. Because I think the step to Bitcoin, we should make that like as little as possible, just to study, right? Again, I think you said that also before. We cannot really, tell people to buy Bitcoin or orange pill other people, like you orange pill yourself. But you need to study, and especially if you think you're going to be in the stock market and do what everyone is doing, then you're not even thinking about what. You're kind of like consciously making a decision, but you're not really studying, and you're also, by the way, playing a game against professional people that have like high-speed satellites to be quicker in trades and all these things. And then you're on your little MacBook, trying to play the same game. But yeah, I think that's a great explanation. And again, something that like makes it a bit simpler to approach, or maybe meet people more where they are at, right? Instead of starting about Bitcoin immediately. Yeah. You also talk about creative destruction. I love that too. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Very similar to kind of what I said with NVIDIA. It's like creative destruction is a very natural process that occurs when markets are free, open, global, and permissionless, right? There's always going to be entrepreneurs out there tinkering, building new stuff, and they're competing and building better products than the existing incumbents. And if you're out there holding the S&P 500, which is all of the incumbent companies, then you're effectively betting against creative destruction from occurring. Like you're hoping that those companies have their walled gardens and their perfect products and services that won't be disrupted. There won't be competition that comes in and tries to take their future cash flows. And there's not going to be a better product or service that someone else creates that goes out and takes some of their share. Now, you would hope that you would be doing like VC investments. Like if you're going full into the fiat game, you would think like, okay, then I want to buy the S&P 500, but then I also want to now buy like all of the VC funds. But then it's like at the end of the day, you're spreading your money everywhere. And what you're really trying to do is to just actually have a good money. Like you're not trying to, you don't actually want to invest in every single thing. You just want good money.
It's interesting just how people view this, because like I think I was kind of lucky because I never got the stock market. Like I just never got it. I don't know, was never attracted to it. Like now I own 2 Bitcoin miner stocks, but that's basically it. Nice. And I think a few years ago, I did have like some more stocks. I actually inherited stocks from like a distant aunt. And I was like 19 and I sold them all, which was dumb eventually. But that's not really the point. It's more like eventually, and I was thinking about it after I started working, etc. Like, okay, how do you do this? Just the stock market, it felt so far away from me, right? Like, as you said, like you put this in an index and then I think you said it well, like you actually would assume that everyone has, their shit figured out. It's working properly. There's no competition. It's always going up, right? It's a false premise, so to say. But it felt like, I don't know, it felt far away from me. So I never really got into that. I mean, luckily, I found Bitcoin at, I don't know, 4 years after I started working. So that was nice. But I think that's also why I didn't really dive into it. And I think if I did, like lots of people do, in both our generations, I think, or at least, there's lots of content about it and people want to do it, and, or the foreign exchange, Forex trading and all that stuff like that, right? I lost the thread in my head, but I think for me, I was lucky that I just wasn't in that, because I think, that was my point. Like, if you do go in that, I think it's really distracting of all the other stuff you could do, including building a business, for example, instead of trying to play the stock market, right? Like actually just taking more control yourself, building value, etc. But of course, then like now we have Bitcoin, but I think I was lucky with that, but I think it's also just part currently of people's distraction from the more substantial questions that are more about, like, what is money, what is wealth, what is ownership, sovereignty, all these things, right? Because again, stocks are also just an IOU on shares that you will never own, right? So it's a similar thing, but yeah. So creative destruction really is, right, the necessary destruction of current companies, services, products, industries, right, to eventually, in a broader sense, help us forward. And it's basically an invitation, right? Like, okay, come do it better. And I think a nice example of it is, for example, BlackBerry. That was all over the place with the business services, and everyone had their email, etc. And now it's just totally gone because something better came along, and they didn't pay attention to the thing that came along, right? And so eventually they die, which is a good thing for me. As to my understanding of capitalism, I would say that is pure capitalism, right?
Yep.
You do something, you win for a while. If you don't adapt, then you die. Like that is the free market. Yeah, so that's I love that you touched upon that. You also talk about the impact of these technological advancements, and you have examples of farming, data storage. I saw strawberries somewhere. I think you made a video about strawberries, I think. Could you share one of these examples and to use it as like an illustration for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's a section in the report called the acceleration of production, where I'm going through things like farming, data storage, oil, lumber, and telecommunications as well, and showing that we're actually becoming incredibly productive at producing all of these basic consumer goods. Farming, for example, like in 1930, one American farmer could feed 4 people. By the 2010s, one farmer was feeding 155 people. And it comes back to kind of what you were mentioning before with like the price of bread. Well, like the price of bread is getting more expensive, especially more expensive since 1930. Yet, one farmer is now, 50x more productive than he was in 1930. Like, how is it possible that bread is getting more expensive? So like, I think, so people recognize that bread is getting more expensive, but they also recognize that like we're getting more efficient at producing these things. Like we have to be. Like we have the internet now, we have all this new machinery, new technology, whether that's in energy, farming, data storage, whatever. Yet these things are getting more expensive, which is quite interesting. But it's like you learn about what the dollar is. Well, what is the dollar? The dollar is a unit of account that's tied to a basket of consumer goods. And then not only that, it's a unit of account that's depreciating against this basket of consumer goods. So it's even worse than people expect. They're like, oh, the dollar is slowly being inflated away. Well, in a way, it's actually being quickly inflated away because it's devaluing against these basic consumer goods. And these basic consumer goods are becoming like more abundant than ever before over the last 100 to 200 years. So it's kind of a double, strike against the dollar. And it also explains like why so many people have resorted to hoarding all of these other more semi-scarce assets like S&P 500 equities or real estate or gold or whatnot. They're not perfectly scarce, but they're semi-scarce, and they bid the price up of all of these things very far. So yeah, that's the idea behind the acceleration of production, just kind of showing that we are getting more efficient, which I think most people, and more productive, which I think most people would agree with. Yet contrasting it with the idea that these things are becoming more expensive. So it's like trying to rationalize like why that's the case, and then really pitching the solution to Bitcoin and saying like, well, if the dollar is losing value against these basic consumer goods, there's a reason that Bitcoin could be, increasing in value relative to all of these consumer goods in a very significant way, pretty much forever, which is quite interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think one of the things that opened my eyes is that like price is not value, right? And so what's the value of a bread? You're not hungry anymore. Like you feed your family. Like the value of a bread did not change in the past 100 years, but the currency you use to put a price on that value, that is actually what's changing, right? So and then you could say the same for real estate, right? Is the price going up because the utility value, safety, being dry, having your own place, privacy, etc., right? The utility value of a home, did that change, in connection with the needs and wants of the people that would live in it, right? Or the people that would eat the bread? And that answer is obviously no. But then why does the price go up? And then I think somewhat a good argument for real estate is that, it gets more scarce in certain places, right? There's just there's just less, more people are moving to New York City, so there's less homes. That is a valid argument. But for bread, there is not really a valid argument, right? And I still think it actually, for me, it works a lot. This example, the bread example, I use the same, I use an apple as well. Like, did the energy necessary to grow an apple from a tree, like, do you think that's the same as 100 years ago, or do you think that's more now? Should it be valued more? Should you need more units to buy one of these apples? And it sounds just stupid when I say it, but most people just say like, yeah, no, that doesn't really make sense, and then say, well, that's my point. So if it's not the apple, what is it, right? It's a currency you use to price it in, and that's kind of like then a leeway to, of course, the rest of that conversation. But do you, maybe to go back to your generation, like how do they look at inflation? Things are getting more pricey. Of course, they look at what they've been told, could be their future, getting a house, etc. Just a classic, expectation of where you go in the future. But they must see higher prices as well, and they have lower incomes. They don't work yet, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, question inflation. Like, they struggle with it. They're like, gosh, like, grocery prices did get more expensive. Prices of, whatever you want to buy, wherever you want, pretty much got more expensive. Like, everything is getting more expensive. Yet they don't necessarily like dive into like the, like what could be a potential solution. I think like a lot of people, young people and, older people, put the blame on like politics per se. And they're like, oh, well, it's because this side printed this much money, or this side printed this much money, or this side raised taxes, or this side lowered taxes. And it's like, at the end of the day, like the system is set up to debase the money forever. Like, it's literally like the whole point of the dollar is to debase the dollar against basic consumer goods. So it's not necessarily like one side or the other, or it's not, a individual person that's going to be elected to power that's going to be able to fix the money. Like, this is just like a systemic problem that not one person within the system is going to be able to fix. It's going to be, we're going to discover a new form of technology that creates a different monetary system that enables people to see prices differently, to save differently, to trade wealth differently. And that's kind of what's happening with Bitcoin, I would argue. So I think young people, like, they don't know exactly what the problem is. And, if they hear about Bitcoin, they don't hear that it's necessarily a solution right away. And if they do hear it's a solution to, inflation, I think they're skeptical unfortunately, at first, which is like, I mean, I was skeptical at first. I think most people are intuitively skeptical about Bitcoin at first. One, because like you don't have, world leaders saying like Bitcoin is like the future world reserve currency, like buy it, or your financial advisor typically is not saying like, hey, go buy a lot of Bitcoin. Like smart people in their lives are not telling them that this is the correct thing to do. And also the volatility like freaks them out, and they're not capable of thinking on like a multi-year time horizon. They're like, oh, Bitcoin, is $66,000 today, but it was $59,000 like last week. And then a couple weeks before that, it was 74,000. So like, they're very short-sighted when it comes to the volatility as well. And unfortunately, I think that prevents them from like initially seeing Bitcoin. But over time, I think people fall to the NGU technology when there's these massive bull markets. And I think more and more people over time are figuring out that Bitcoin actually is, the solution to inflation.
Yeah, on that volatility part, of course, that is something that critics argue with a lot, right? They say that makes it unsuitable as a store of value. How do you respond to that generally?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's probably like one of the biggest hurdles that people see when they first discover Bitcoin. The way I think about Bitcoin's volatility is the core rules of Bitcoin have been the same for about 15 straight years. The supply schedule of Bitcoin has not changed. The permissionless nature of Bitcoin has not changed. The ability to hold the coins without a counterparty risk has not changed. There's been no change in the risk of creating more than 21 million Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself as a system is incredibly stable. It's actually probably like one of the most stable systems in the world, considering like there's no centralized party that's controlling it. So the volatility of Bitcoin is really like the people that are around Bitcoin interacting with Bitcoin. And, I think over the last 13 years or so, Bitcoin has had a compound annual growth rate of like 130%. So the price of Bitcoin is growing incredibly rapidly. And so to expect that something to grow 130% annually for 13 straight years in like a perfect exponential line is like complete nonsense. Like theoretically, like what would happen if that was the case, if Bitcoin was growing at 130 something percent every year and most people didn't understand what it was? There would be massive bull markets where people are buying in because the price is going up. The price would get overextended way too far, and we would start to go into a bear market because people don't understand what they hold. Some people start panic selling. Some people are scared to buy when the price is going down, so the price goes down even further, and we have these crazy dark bear markets. But at the end of the day, at the bottom of the bear market, Bitcoin is still the world's best money, and we end up going into yet another bull market, and the price of Bitcoin goes crazy once again. So I think there's a lot of like alpha per se for people that recognize that like Bitcoin itself as a system is incredibly stable. In fact, it's like pretty anti-fragile. Like if things break or things go bad, like we can fix them. Like there have been bugs in Bitcoin, and like we fix bugs in Bitcoin. And if you try to attack Bitcoin or whatnot, Bitcoin typically gets stronger. Whether that's something like, the Silk Road, people used Bitcoin back for the Silk Road back then, and, Bitcoin survived that. FTX collapsed, Bitcoin survived that. Mt. Gox collapsed, Bitcoin survived that. Like a lot of things have happened around Bitcoin that have, added to this volatility and confused a lot of people, but Bitcoin itself is incredibly stable. So yeah, I think Bitcoin's volatility is interesting. I think it enables you to like capitalize on it and recognize that since Bitcoin is actually really stable, the volatility is just the people around the world adopting Bitcoin. And that's just a volatile process, as there's waves of adoption, and still 99.9% of the world doesn't, understand what Bitcoin is. So it's reasonable to expect this volatility to continue.
Yeah, great explainer. I never looked at it like that before. I never also really had a good answer to this. Like I would say Bitcoin itself is stable, nothing changed, right? Like if the price goes down, I still feel it even after like 10, 11 years, I still feel it, right? But then how do I check if anything changed? Is check my node and see if anything changed, and nothing changed, right? And so then you can the only thing to argue is that, okay, this is the understanding of people. But I think like 2-3 weeks ago, Michael Saylor had that talk, There is No Second Best. And there is a part about volatility in there where he says like, Bitcoin is the only thing that's traded worldwide 24/7, 365. So the price always reflects either the understanding or the emotional connection of the people holding it to, it's only that, right? And I thought that was great. And that is also just it. It just shows the understanding of the people that hold it, basically, right? And of course, with that, we sometimes have these like longs cascading down or shorts or, but then I would argue then you also don't understand what you have, because why would you gamble with that? But that's another conversation, I think. So for the future, how do you look at hyper Bitcoinization, and how do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, it's a great question and definitely fun to think about. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think, going on a Bitcoin standard is not necessarily something that like the whole world does all at once. It's something that like you as an individual do. Like you can adopt Bitcoin yourself. You can decide to hold it, use it as a store of value, use it as a unit of account to measure if you are holding wealth outside of Bitcoin. Like, was that a good decision? Like, did you make more Bitcoins or did you lose Bitcoins making that decision? I think that that's like a gradual process that will continue to occur over time. Over time, more people will see that Bitcoin is unprintable money. The dollar is printable money. That's going to inevitably result in number go up over time. And it's going to accelerate as people get out of the printable money and get into the unprintable money. And when that happens, like, we have this unprintable money right now, and arguably less than 1% of the world understands that it's unprintable money and understands that it's a good money to hold. And so people are going to figure that out. And that's what's been happening for the last 15 years. And that's why it has 130% compound annual growth rate. And when people figure it out, it goes up even more, and it's pretty crazy. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's hyper Bitcoinization. It's something it's pretty much already happening. Like, we're probably going to look back in the history books and be like, you literally could have bought Bitcoin for 1 cent, or you could have bought Bitcoin for $60,000 or $66,000 in 2024, and now the price of Bitcoin is millions of dollars or millions of dollars in real terms, decades down the line. And it's going to, in hindsight, it's going to be a pretty short period. Like, 20, 30 years is not really that long in the grand scheme of like the history of money. I mean, thinking about like how long gold was money, or how long even fiat money, which is pretty much a 50-year-old experiment at this point. It's 50 years is a pretty significant amount of time. Like, Bitcoin became $1 trillion asset in 15 years or a little bit less. And so I think we're gonna look back and be like, we actually were living through hyper Bitcoinization. Like, it felt slow at the time, but in hindsight, it was happening pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, I feel in general it does feel slow sometimes. I think I tweeted this a few weeks ago, but sometimes I just realized, like, you and I were talking, we figured this out in some way, shape, or form. I don't know, some miracle. I cannot even retrace my steps as to how I got here, but we are seeing this, right? And now it feels so. I just want other people to see it too, And so sometimes I'm just like, oh, can't we hurry up? Like, why is this so slow, But yeah, I think you're right. It's really, I think American Hodl said it also. Like, fiat is also a blip in the history of the entire history of money, right? And so Bitcoin is still even a way smaller blip on its way to hopefully become, the money. But yeah, that is how early we are. So the fact that we are already here, I think we are blessed and we should be grateful. But it is really just the start. Like, 15 years is nothing.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, it's definitely still early in hyper Bitcoinization. Like, I would argue that we are probably significantly less than 1% of the world like truly understands Bitcoin. And like 94% of all Bitcoin, or roughly that, have already been mined. And so you're going to have, 99.9% of the world chasing after the 4% that's remaining to be mined. And then also from the existing holders. So like, it could be it could get crazy.
Yeah. I asked this to Chris Berger in a previous episode, but I think you're a good person to ask too. How many people in the world do you think actually understand what this is?
Ooh, that's a great question. It depends on what you mean by understand.
Like how you and I understand it.
Okay. Not many. To be totally fair, I don't think really anyone quite understands what this is. Like not even us.
No, that's true. We're figuring it out, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, for sure. But to using Bitcoin like as your unit of account and like using it as like your primary tool for long-term savings, I would probably say like there's like less than like 100,000 people for sure if I had to guess.
Yeah.
What do you think?
He said no more than 1 million. Yeah, I'm also more in the 100,000 camp.
Yeah.
Just if I look at, I don't know, Twitter followers of people or something like that, you know, like, or I don't know, well, on Reddit, there's like 6.6 million members actually of the subreddit, which is huge. But sometimes I see discussions there where I think like, no, you don't understand it to that degree, right? So it's really, I tops definitely 1 million, but probably way lower, which I love as a thought. So let's go with 100K, right? It's 15 years old. 100,000 people in the world know what this is. You know, also, you know, within the perspective of the money we have now, where that's going, all the debt, etc. You know, what are the societal implications of having an immutable, unprintable money, right? Like, what would that do to the lives of people? Find more meaning, all these things, right? Save your energy over time and space, like all these things. And still, Wall Street adopted it. I find that so fascinating. It's so tiny. There are subreddits with more than 100,000 people that understand the subject that the subreddit is about, right? I don't know, knitting or something, or I don't know. Knitting is a stupid example, but you know what I mean. Like there are bigger niches that are totally not unserviced, totally not getting airtime on CNBC and all these things, right? So I find it a funny thought exercise to think about it like that, and then think about how Bitcoin is portrayed, talked about, what type of people move into it, right? If you really think about it like that, then for me, it's kind of like a signal. Like, this is a thing. It's actually a thing.
100%. I mean, you see, people are going to adopt it. I mean, like Wall Street is going to go out there and sell Bitcoin if they can make money off of it, and that's exactly what they're doing. So yeah, I mean, to me,
there's lots of things to make money off, right? Like, why this thing? It says something. It's greed from them. I would agree, but why this thing?
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, I think people just over time are figuring out this is number go up technology. Whether they understand why, it doesn't really matter. Like, they're just going to figure out number go up technology. So I need to buy and hold some of this.
Yeah. I mean, that's how almost everyone gets in, right? So that's totally fine. Yeah. So what do you think are some risks for people who choose to ignore Bitcoin's growing influence?
I think the main risk is you'll look back on, you know, your portfolio, like your net worth, the savings that you have. It could be a lot, it could be a very little, and you'll realize like how much Bitcoin, and we already feel this today, right? Like, you realize how much Bitcoin you could have bought, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it's like, wow, like that was a lot of Bitcoin. And so if you choose to continue to ignore it, then you're probably going to get 5 more years down the line and realize like, wow, I could have bought that much Bitcoin or that many sats even. And, you know, now I may not make that many sats for the rest of my entire earning career because the price of Bitcoin relative to everything else has gone up so much. So I think it's something that like you can ignore, and you can continue living like in fiat world, and things will continue getting more expensive, and you'll continue to feel like you're falling behind. But you now have a new tool that's out there that will enable you to not feel like you're falling behind, to actually feel like you're maybe getting ahead, and maybe at least staying on a level playing field with the top capital allocators in the entire world, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we figured it out before the finance bros, man. That's so funny.
Exactly.
So funny. But I like what you said. Also, what I love is there's like unit bias going down, but there's also unit bias going up, right? So I think to illustrate how fast it could go to what you said is if Bitcoin is $100,000, way more people are going to pay attention to it, right? I really think 100K is like a meme number, right? Like 100K and Twitter will explode. It will be everywhere, right? Like that's always been a psychological barrier for me as well. Like 100K means 1 million means 10 million and so on. But 100K, if you are a cash millionaire, 1 million millionaire, are you going to buy one? Are you going to put in 10% of what your net worth is, right? I think it's just an interesting question. Like, would you do that? And even though it would be more and more legitimized at that price, I think for a lot of people it would still be a very, very difficult decision. But then, like, so my point is more like you have to understand that you're going to get priced out, maybe in terms of hard dollars, but also in terms of the unit bias that you carry with you. So you need to study, even if you don't want to buy it yet. Like, you need to study, even in case it gets to that point, so you can make a rational decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think it works. The unit bias is so interesting. It does kind of work multiple ways, where to some extent, I do think it does help people because they're like, oh, I need to reach, 1 Bitcoin per se. And, one bit, like $60,000 to an average person around the world, that's a lot of money.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, it makes you like maybe stretch yourself a little bit more than you intuitively would if, we were initially quoting in sats, because you're like, oh, well, I already got, 10 million sats, which is, 0.1 Bitcoin. Oh, that's plenty. Like 10 million sats, whatever, that's a lot. So it makes you stretch more potentially. But then the counter side of that is like, it makes people, less inclined to consider it. Like they're like, oh, I'll never be able to afford 1 Bitcoin, and so I'll give up and never try, which is kind of unfortunate. So there's pros and cons to looking at it both ways.
Yeah. I just Googled average yearly salary worldwide. What do you think it is?
Probably like $25,000 US. What is it?
9,733.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Makes sense though.
From April 23. But yeah, that makes sense. So, but this already shows that, making over 100,000 a year is top 10 global. But most people would be priced out of 1, which is also, I think, an argument that lots of critics use, right? Like, yeah, you should have been early, then you were lucky, etc. But I think we should go from the 1 Bitcoin, it's a nice thing to say, like it's an attainable, that's what you should do. But we should rather go to like 1 million sats or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on like who you are, right? Like for some people, getting to 1 Bitcoin is great. For some people, getting to 1 million sats is great. Like it depends on where you are in the world and like, what your upbringing was and, a lot of different factors. But yeah, I mean, like I think both are going to be very, that's going to be a lot of money in the future for sure. Yeah. So both work.
I saw people who wanted to change the word sats to actually Bitcoin, so that 1 sat would be 1 Bitcoin, right? To turn it around, maybe to combat the unit bias, to also help people. I thought that was an interesting idea. Well, and so when people buy Bitcoin, of course, or when they own it, it's totally different than what you would have, versus a traditional bank where you basically kind of like outsource the responsibility over the wealth, right? If you hold your own Bitcoin, then it's all on you. But how do you look at these kind of like security aspects when you hold Bitcoin? Because I also want to share or ask like how you do this at Unchained, because they offer a different possibility too, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think when people originally get into Bitcoin, they want the number go up technology and they don't think about anything else, which is completely reasonable. That could be buying ETF, buying on FTX, buying on BlockFi, buying on Coinbase. Doesn't matter. They just want the number go up. Then over time, it becomes the number goes up for you. And you're like, I need to figure out how to store this securely because I don't want to lose it, right? Like we've seen history shows that if you don't know what you're doing with your Bitcoin, you're going to lose it. And so I think people turn to something like self-custody, where they're like, oh, Bitcoin is a bearer asset that I can hold myself. I can actually hold the private keys to Bitcoin. But that requires a lot of personal responsibility. It can be scary. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can lose your Bitcoin. And so Unchained is a pretty great solution where you can work with them and they'll have a backup key for your Bitcoin. And you'll set up what's called a multi-sig vault, which is just short for multi-signature or multi-key. And you as an individual can hold 2 of the keys to your Bitcoin, and then Unchained holds 1 backup key. And so in that case, you can always move your Bitcoin out of your Unchained vault with both of your keys. But if you happen to lose a key or one gets stolen or whatever happens, then Unchained has that backup key that gives you that extra assurance that you're not going to lose your Bitcoin. So I think Unchained is a great way to hold Bitcoin for the future.
Yeah, I love that. I need to dive into that more. There's, I think multi-sig is one of the biggest things that I have not dove into or like enough. I also wanted to ask you, you went from being interested, studying, like 6-ish years ago, to now full-time researcher. How has your perspective on Bitcoin changed? What's the biggest thing you think changed?
It's a great question. One thing that I think is interesting is you don't realize how small it still is. Like you're outside of Bitcoin and you see people with lots of followers on Twitter or whatnot, and you're like, wow, like this Bitcoin thing is so huge. I'm late to the party. And then like you start working in companies in the Bitcoin space, you start talking to miners, you do a bunch of different things in the Bitcoin space. And you're like, at the end of the day, like these are all just people interacting with this new tool called Bitcoin. Like we think we know what's happening, but this is just kind of like an alien technology that's been dropped on us, and it's increasing in value at like an unprecedented rate. And we're all just trying to use it and interact with it in our own unique, way, and we're all acting in our own incentive to do so, for our own personal benefit. And so, yeah, I think it's just like, it's so early. It's still very small compared to, so many other industries and whether that's like technology in general or financial services or banking or whatnot. And people are still like figuring out like, how Bitcoin works and like how the best way to hold it is. And a lot of people like are just learning as they go, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, me too. I think it's an ongoing journey, right? I think, maybe to clarify what I said before, like we have figured it out. Well, I meant up until a certain point. We have definitely not figured out the entire thing. I think the entire thing, I don't know, like it culminates in prosperity of humanity or something. So that I feel that's still very far away, and also totally not understandable what that would be, right? So there's so many aspects still to figure out. I think that what gives me my enthusiasm and interest to just keep on learning about this is like I feel that this is a never-ending thing. Like every week I have my mind blown about another piece of content that I read or like a quote I hear where I think like, oh yeah, I can look at it from this way, right? So I think, it's just something that I think has captivated me, but also you went into Bitcoin as a career as well. What made you do that? Like to go from studying to becoming like a real advocate also?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin, like I'm sure it is for you. It's like it's something that I like couldn't stop thinking about. Like once like the lottery ticket analogy that I used earlier. It's like I saw Bitcoin as a lottery ticket, then I realized it's a lottery ticket with like pretty incredible odds, and then I'm like, if someone handed you a lottery ticket that was like you saw the winning numbers, tomorrow or 10 years from now already, and you're like, all you got to do is hold on to this lottery ticket and it's like going to go up in value a lot, like it's pretty hard not to be fascinated with that. And so like during 2021 bull market, that was when I had the opportunity to join a Bitcoin company full time, and I was like, I'm going to do this. Like, why not? Like, I'm still young. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. And haven't looked back. It's been a wild ride, but it's been awesome.
Yeah, I love to see it, man. I think it's very inspirational to see someone really take that jump. Of course, I'm also spending lots of time on this, but I would also love to continue, my career or also go full time on a podcast just to work on this, because I have the same. I think this is almost the only thing I think about every day. I think it's just so interesting, and yeah, fun. I love to see that. So if someone is new to Bitcoin, what advice would you give them on learning about it or developing their mindset to start studying it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're new to Bitcoin, I would say have an extremely long time horizon. Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme. It's not a gamble per se either. In the short term, it's certainly a gamble, and it's extremely volatile. And so you have to understand that Bitcoin can and probably will fall 80% again at some point in the future. Maybe it'll fall from like 500,000 and fall 80%, or maybe it'll fall from 100,000. Like, it's hard to tell exactly what the price of Bitcoin is going to do, but it's going to be volatile. But it's also going to most likely, in my opinion at least, have extreme massive upside. So yeah, I think just be aware of that. You can read something like the Bitcoin Standard, Lynn Alden's Broken Money. I know we were talking about Lynn Alden's video that's kind of highlighted Broken Money. It's a great 30-minute, easy to watch video. We talked about the report that I wrote called Your Wealth is Melting. That's a great report for people to check out. And yeah.
Yeah, those are great starting points. I would add to that, I loved Bitcoin Explainer by Jack Mallers at Bitcoin Atlantis. I was there in the crowd and I thought, well, okay, he's going to tell about Bitcoin. I know this stuff, but I thought this was the best explainer I've seen in 10 years. So I would also recommend people to check that out too. I think it's like 45 minutes or something like that. So yeah, you know what? I think it's fun. Like, there's so many resources out there, like to learn about Bitcoin, right? So from whatever angle you look at it or get into it, or whatever piques your interest at first, like there's already so much content to definitely compared to 10 years ago, by the way, to just read up on, right? Like you can get a good grasp of this, well, just from your report, I'd say, right? As to why this is a thing and why people are paying interest to this. And from there on, if you're triggered, then I think Twitter and Google are your best friends, and there's just so much to find. So yeah, cool. Last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief you will never let go?
It's a great question. My answer to this, probably have many answers, but simple, short answer would probably be like, free markets and capitalism are the most appropriate way to price capital, price goods and services, to price businesses, to price ideas, to price, equities, to price real estate, price Bitcoin. And in the world of capitalism and free markets, people all act in their own self-interest, and the consumer and the people are the ones that ultimately benefit the most from this system of everyone acting in their own self-interest. And I think if we can continue to create efficient markets and drive down barriers between people, groups of people, countries, and whatnot, and allow people to act freely and act, in their own self-interest without harming others, I think that the world would be a better place.
Love that, man. Great ender. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I will make sure to link to your X account so people can follow you. I think your report is probably in your pinned tweet, so people can check that out too. And yeah, man, thanks for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was awesome. I enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, it would be amazing if you could rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. It will help us educate more millennials on the importance of Bitcoin. You can follow and connect with me on Twitter. I'm Bramk, that's at BRAMK. And if you are or know someone who has an interesting perspective on Bitcoin that's worth sharing, hit me up. I read and reply to every single message. I appreciate your support and hope you'll be here for the next episode. Thanks for listening. Bye.